the Diocese of Biloxi. The faith was first planted here by French missionary priests. It came of age under the leadership of its first bishop and is thriving today under the guidance of its current apostle, Bishop Louis Kihneman.
In the end, it's my relationship with Jesus Christ and His church. He's planted me here, He wants me to serve here, and He's getting it all. There's nothing held back.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. Sitting directly on the Mississippi Sound, with barrier islands scattered off the coast and into the Gulf of Mexico, is the city of Biloxi, Sea City of the Diocese of Biloxi.
In the South right now, in terms of faith, Mississippi actually is one of the most faith-filled states in the Union. It's amazing, but we are. We're very, very strong Baptist Bible Belt. One of the challenges, though, is that since we're a very, very deep minority, to have a voice is part of the challenge.
The area was first home to Native Americans, known as the Biloxi tribe, and the area changed hands countless times over the years between the Spanish, French, British, and the United States. It was the French, however, who claimed the entire Mississippi Basin for their own in 1682, calling it Louisiana in honor of King Louis XIV. 16 years later, in 1698, Pierre Le Moyne set sail from France with about 200 colonists, commissioned by the king to establish a colony in Biloxi Bay. These French settlers brought with them Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries.
What happens is in this area when they arrive, they establish their first settlement in Biloxi Bay. And then in 1702, the settlement becomes relocated into what is now modern-day Mobile, Alabama. But later then, it moves on to New Orleans.
The Catholic presence in the region dates back to the 1700s with the work of French and Spanish missionaries who came to the region. The Catholic faith, though, was largely kept alive within families themselves, as families gathered for worship, coming together in private homes when missionary priests were available. Throughout much of the 1700s, though, the region around Biloxi saw very little Catholic development, overshadowed by its larger neighbor in New Orleans and the development that was taking place there.
In 1826, the Vicariate Apostolic of Mississippi was established, which was later elevated to the Diocese of Natchez. In 1837, John Mary Joseph Chaunch, a native of Baltimore, was appointed as the first bishop.
When Bishop Chaunch arrives, he finds very, very few Catholics. He really only finds one priest ministering to the needs of not just the settlers, but Native Americans as well. Over time, he brings in 11 or so new priests to minister to the community there. He also begins to lay the cornerstone for the cathedral there. So he's focused not just on building the physical structure of the church, but also cultivating the community of souls as well.
And it wasn't until the post-Civil War years that a sizable Catholic population really begins to emerge in what is now the Diocese of Biloxi. At the time, the Catholic Church devoted resources to evangelizing the newly freed population, particularly in the work of the Josephite Fathers and the Divine Word Fathers, who had special ministries to evangelizing African Americans. And the Divine Word Fathers later established a seminary in what is now the Diocese of Biloxi.
By the mid-20th century, the city of Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, had grown to such an extent that it became the more appropriate center for the diocese, and it was moved. In 1977, the southern counties of Mississippi were formed into a new diocese, the Diocese of Biloxi.
There's only 2 dioceses in Mississippi right now. At that time, though, there was one, and that was the Diocese of Natchez-Jackson, and we were all together, the whole state. The church had grown enough that in 1977, the Holy Father really felt that it was time for the diocese to be split. And so the southern part of Mississippi was made into the Diocese of Biloxi.
The establishment of the Diocese of Biloxi in 1977 reflects the post-World War II growth of the region, especially the Catholic population along the Gulf Coast, which was part of a larger Sunbelt migration of Catholics, as well as the movement of those from the Diocese of New Orleans across the Gulf Coast. The first bishop of the diocese, Joseph Howes, held office for 24 years.
The Holy Father had enough insight and foresight to name the first African-American bishop in the United States. He really was a trailblazer. We got a chance to spend some time with him, of course, in the last few years of his life. He was quite a character. He loved the church deeply. He loved the church in southern Mississippi deeply, and he's beloved by the people of the church in Mississippi.
Originally is a Baptist, then his family converts to the Methodist faith. He's very involved in his faith community. He's an organist, a choir director, and a later vocation in life as well. He's teaching high school, and he really starts to feel drawn to Catholicism.
He was originally turned down from entering the seminary in his home diocese when his bishop believed that the diocese was not yet ready for a black priest. He instead was accepted to study for the Diocese of Raleigh, which sent him to Christ the King Seminary outside of Buffalo, New York. Upon returning to Raleigh, Bishop Howes was assigned to a parish that he later helped integrate. And so he brought this concern about racial integration with him as Bishop of Biloxi.
He's been a gift to us. Appreciate his service to the church because he really set the foundation of the diocese. I think that's part of the reason why in southern Mississippi we're more integrated than people realize. It's partly because of him. And I did ask him, I said, did you have any difficult moments? And he said, really, people were very good overall. My African American or my African priests are accepted throughout the entire diocese. They're beloved, and so that's partly due to him, and how far we've come, as a church and as a people in southern Mississippi.
In Biloxi, Bishop Howes also recognized the need to respond to the changing face of Catholicism in his own diocese. In addition to the growth of the Hispanic population, the diocese also saw the growth of the Vietnamese population, many of whom had come to the diocese through the work of Catholic Charities, which helped to resettle Vietnamese refugees after the Vietnam War.
In 1975, when the Vietnamese really started coming in this direction, they were embraced, by the church. We as a Catholic Church were very much there for them. And we have a number of different communities now that are heavily influenced by our Vietnamese folks. Some of the folks that have come from the Philippines also, especially in the healthcare ministry. They've been also part of us. And then most recently, it's been our Hispanic folk, very Spanish speaking. We've got people from Puerto Rico, we've got people from Central America, from Mexico, even people from South America that have come. I'm able to celebrate Mass for them in Spanish and preach in Spanish and teach in Spanish and, spend time with them in Spanish. So that's been a real gift to be able to be with them.
The diocese, both its people and its parishes, experienced the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. Bishop Thomas Roddy, for the first few years after the hurricane, pulled the diocese together. He was followed by Bishop Roger Morin, who came in to carry on the work.
Bishop Morin in particular had come to the diocese from the Archdiocese of New Orleans, where he had personally experienced the devastation of Hurricane Katrina, seeing his own residence go up in flames in the aftermath of the hurricane. He also brought to Biloxi a unique skill set that helped the diocese rebuild. He had an extensive background in Catholic social services and social work, and so he was uniquely positioned to help the diocese in the years after Hurricane Katrina.
One of Bishop House's first acts as bishop was to name the Cathedral of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary as his cathedral. The original building was built in 1843, but in November of 1900, it burned to the ground in the Great Biloxi Fire. It was soon rebuilt, and today it stands as a beacon of faith for the people of Biloxi.
Bishop House chose Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary as his cathedral, partly because this church has such a rich history, and it's really the first church in the area. This particular church was built in 1902, was again damaged in storms and things through the years, but the people have been very good to really keep it to be a place of prayer, worship, and great beauty in the Lord.
The exterior is really substantial. It has several strata of windows, a tower, as well as a clock face, which is keeping time for prayer. So historically, the Liturgy of the Hours, as well as the call to Mass. It is a neo-Gothic structure. It's really quite stately and prominent. So right away, when we approach the building, we know that this building matters, and that great care was taken in designing it. Historically, when this building was first constructed in the early 20th century, the walls would have been much, much darker. And so that light pouring in, a bit like being in a forest and all of these sort of tall, dark trees, which we get always with Gothic architecture, you also have light pouring in, dappled through leaves. And that's very much that experience that you get in a Gothic church. The clustered columns can really be seen like tree trunks, and the way they open up into these groin vaults is like a tree canopy. One of the really notable features is not just the quality of the stained glass, but the amount of windows. And there's great significance in that, both in the way they let the light in, but also in the Annunciation, so specific to the Blessed Virgin herself, often in depictions of the Annunciation. The imagery of the Holy Spirit penetrating the windows to fill the Blessed Virgin with Christ is really significant in the symbolism of this cathedral. So the light of Christ comes pouring in, and we see that from the exterior, and then from the interior, it really is a feast.
Well, the cathedral itself, of course, has the chair of the bishop. In that, Bishop House chose it as the cathedra, the cathedral. In many ways, it is the heart of the diocese. The tradition of faith that's represented here is one that really speaks for the whole diocese. It's not the biggest church in the diocese. It's probably one of our smaller ones, actually. In the end, its importance is profound. The number of bishops that have been ordained here, the number of priests ordained here, the number of deacons ordained here, and that now serve in the Diocese of Biloxi is really profound. I was ordained here also. It's been a blessing to have this as the seat, if you will, of the diocese.
The cathedra, or chair inside the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, represents Bishop Kihneman's authority as the Apostle of Biloxi.
I grew up really in the South. My family moved quite a bit. My father was with Mobil Oil. Faith was always really very, very important to the family. And we lived in New Orleans twice. And then we moved to Corpus Christi, Texas in 1963, and I entered the seminary in 1966. So that was high school, and So I'm a lifer. I was in for, since high school. Was ordained a priest for Corpus Christi and served there for 39 years as a priest. Really had a sense that I wanted to serve people and to do something that was lasting. But in the end, it was that special relationship in faith with Jesus Christ and his church that drew me, to the priesthood. My first assignment was actually in Mexico, and I actually had asked to go. It was initially to finish learning Spanish. I had a huge vocabulary and could read really well in Spanish, but my speaking in Spanish was very, very poor. The year I spent there in Mexico really changed my priesthood completely. To live with the poor, to be with the poor, to share with the poor, to experience their lives, to help them learn about Christ. We were circuit riders, if you will. We were in a different village every day, and they'd see us once a month. Really quite powerful. Of course, by the time I finished that tour of duty, the Spanish was pretty good. So it's come in handy now, because we have some strong Spanish-speaking communities here in the Diocese of Biloxi. I did work in a lot of different ministries, as a priest, and I was the director of religious education for the diocese as a transitional deacon. I was called to be vocation director for the Diocese of Corpus Christi, director of seminarians, and our ministry to priest program, and I really got to know people very well. So the priest of the Diocese of Corpus Christi, I really came to really love and to be with them. And each of the different programs that we ran for lifting up the faith of our lay people, it was a similar kind of thing. I found each of the different ministries that I had throughout the years to be overall blessings. Some were more challenging than others.
After years of ministry within the Diocese of Corpus Christi, on April 28, 2017, Bishop Kihneman was ordained the next Bishop of Biloxi.
I remember the moment of the phone call that I got from Archbishop Pierre, and as soon as I heard his accent, I went, oh my God. I said, I hope this is not what I think it is. And it was what I thought it was. So I was in my office in Corpus Christi at St. Philip's Parish. I was pastor at the time, but vicar general also, doing both jobs. And after some cordialities, he simply said, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, wants you to be the fourth bishop of the Diocese of Biloxi, Mississippi. Will you accept? And I said, well, let's talk about that a little bit, because you realize I'm almost 65 years old, and he just repeated the question again. That's all he did. So we talked for about 10 or 15 minutes, and he asked me again at the end of the conversation, will you accept? And I said, yes, I will. And then, the phone call ended, but I just sat in my office for the next 20 minutes, just totally overwhelmed, blown away, just totally surprised. I mean, it was not on my radar screen at all. I figured the day of those kind of things had passed, and the Lord had another way for me to go. And I discovered that the Lord didn't. He wanted me to come here, and that changed everything. As a bishop, I discovered quickly the difference between being a bishop and being the vicar general. And it's the chair. When you sit in the chair, it's a whole different ball game. The vicar general supports the chair, but the bishop is sitting in the chair, and so the buck stops with the bishop. It's been quite a challenge, making the shift to being the bishop, of the diocese. I spent almost 40 years as a priest in the Diocese of Corpus Christi, and I had a lot of friends and people I knew and interacted with and kind of had a rhythm of life. So the call of the Holy Father and Christ really upset that in many ways. So part of the challenge in coming to Biloxi, which is a new area for me, I didn't really know very many people at all, has been to just be open to the Spirit and trust God in my life. And yeah, there are some times when it's lonely and, wish I could pop over to some of my friends that I knew. And sometimes I'll pick up the phone and call them. But I've got a group of priest friends that have kind of stuck with me, and now some bishop friends that I'm getting to know, and of course some people within the Diocese of Biloxi that I'm getting to know over time. Part of it's patience, these things take time. The church, does love us as priests and bishops in its own way. Just need to be open, to it. In the end, it's my relationship with Jesus Christ and his church, which makes all the difference in the world. That's actually where I began with the whole call. So in some ways, I've come full circle, but now it's more really being in his arms. He's planted me here. He wants me to serve here. And so he's getting it all. There's nothing held back. There's nothing that I'm not giving him. I'm all in. I'm all in.